Hello, I'm George and welcome to All Games Reviewed. In this video we'll be covering Two Worlds, a series of games published by Topware Interactive. First off, I'd like to establish some rules and explain the structure. I'll be reviewing every game in the Two Worlds series. Every game will be scored out of 10. In the conclusion, I'll take the collective individual scores to create an average. This average is intended to represent the quality of the series as a whole. I won't be scoring DLC separately for two reasons. Firstly, I think it's simpler and more fair if a game is judged on its core identity and functionality. Secondly, Two Worlds 2 has a shitload of DLC, and in all honesty, I didn't want to play it all. Two Worlds, the Oblivion Killer, is a bit of an odd beast. Topware were blowing their own trumpet hard in the run-up to the game's release, stating it offered more character development than any of its competitors, and that players have a real chance to shape the game world with their actions, to an extent that has yet to be seen in other productions. These were bold claims that were swiftly proven wrong after the game finally came out in 2007. The sickening arrogance that Topware was spouting will have definitely put people off, and by the time Two Worlds had come out, Oblivion had already taken the world by storm. Now it's 2022 and the dust has settled. Given that presently there is much less distracting press coverage of Two Worlds, it will be a lot easier to review these games impartially. We'll cover Two Worlds 3 separately when it comes out in 2037. With all that said, grab a beer, water, or whatever is acceptable these days, and join me in observing the first game in the series. Come one, come all for the fantasy role-playing game of the century, Two Worlds. I am saying that with a touch of sarcasm, but don't worry, it's not all bad news. I reviewed Two Worlds not too long ago and I went in pretty hard on it. I reviewed the game without completing it and that was a mistake. Not because it gets better with time, it actually gets worse in a lot of ways, but the charm of the game didn't really click with me until later on. When you first start playing Two Worlds, it's a really odd experience. It feels a little bit like a single-player MMORPG. The areas are flat and basic with little detail, the towns feel like they lack depth, and a lot of the quests involve either fetching or killing. The story of Two Worlds revolves around an unnamed protagonist and his sister. Kira is abducted and the only way to save her is to go around the map gathering elemental relics. The story is simplistic and is centered around saving a princess. This is a tired and worn out trope at this point, but it gets you into the game's world. The dialogue is poorly written and sometimes cringe-inducing, which goes hand in hand with the laughable voice acting.
Say hello to death.
Through the side quests, the player is sometimes introduced to situations that are a test of morality, but the game doesn't go deep enough with these concepts to create a sense of intrigue. The main quest is really simple. After you've gathered the relics, you travel around a little bit more, kill 3 bosses, then get kicked out to the title screen. The ending allows you to choose between 2 outcomes. You can either side with Gandohar and allow the god of fire's spirit to merge with your sister, or oppose him and kill him to free her. The canon ending is that you side with Gandohar, and that's where the second game picks up. Well, sort of. The game actually benefits from having a simplistic structure for the main quest. Having multiple points on the map far away from one another encourages exploration, and each area that you're led to has many side quests to sink your teeth into. Unfortunately, the side quests are less than inspiring, but can benefit your character by offering spell cards, money, or a boost in reputation as rewards. The gameplay of Two Worlds is absolutely intolerable at first. This is mainly due to the combat. In the first few hours of the game, you get your arse handed to you multiple times. The lock-on feature is dicey, so you often feel like you're just mindlessly swinging at enemies. Shields are available, but there's no blocking, so the only advantage they have is increasing your physical defense, stats, and parry rating. Once you're on your feet and set up with some decent gear, the game is a lot more manageable, but it's too clunky and basic to be enjoyable. There's no element of strategy. Mobs are often huge and take forever to get through, the AI is questionable, encountering multiple enemies in melee often means that they'll all swing at you with no discernible pattern, archers fire at you and then run away when you get close, which is super annoying, and to top it all off, the horse-mounted combat is completely useless. Mainly because you have little to no control over your horse. The boss fights are also underwhelming because there isn't much variety in the boss's movesets. You can just stand in one spot, swing your sword and spam potions most of the time. The jankiness of the game isn't exclusive to combat. NPCs often get stuck in doorways and their dialogue cuts out. The world map is fairly confusing. It's okay once you're used to it, but at first it's an eyesore. It took me a while to realise what each icon meant and where to go. Sometimes the game design just flat out doesn't make sense. I got locked out of a village that I needed to get into for a quest item. I scaled an adjacent hill to try and find a hidden entrance into the village. I accidentally got killed by a cyclops and spawned inside the village. What's the point in putting a barrier up if you can get past it by inadvertently dying? It doesn't make any sense. There are a lot of negatives in the gameplay of Two Worlds, but there are also some positives. The UI of your inventory screen, spells and equipment is old-fashioned but very functional. Assigning things to the bar is a little bit confusing, but the general look is coherent, and the feel of the UI is pretty responsive. Ghosts of any creature or person you've killed will attack you at night time, which is quite a unique idea. You can combine items of the same type to create a more powerful version of that item. This really came in handy in the final stretch of the game, as the penultimate boss is an absolute tank with an ocean of HP. There's some nice little quality of life features, such as different loot icons for creatures that drop multiple items instead of one item. This helps you decide whether or not you could be bothered to pick up alchemy ingredients. Features like this make me feel reassured in a way, because I know that the developers didn't make a poor product out of malice or laziness. It was just a general level of incompetence. Moving on to presentation, the look of Two Worlds is a pretty mixed bag. The textures are bland and the post effects are simple. A lot of the character models blend into the environment, and the NPCs in towns often look very similar. Overall, it just looks kind of boring. There's a nice variety of locations, which all use different cultural and historical aspects to influence them. The game has a typical Arthurian-inspired high fantasy influence at its core, but also introduces influences from the Far East and Roman history. These are interesting design philosophies in isolation, but the game's world isn't big enough to accommodate how much distance there should be between areas that are so vastly different in look and ideals. It would be like playing Daggerfall, Morrowind, Oblivion and Skyrim all in one map. Picking one eye-catching visual style, committing the game's world to that, and then allowing more expansion for detail may have been a more consistent way to do it. The sound design of Two Worlds is pretty standard. Some of the sound effects are oddly ethereal and misplaced, but more often than not they do their job. Most creatures make really irritating and sometimes unintentionally funny noises. I'll leave it up to you whether that's a positive or negative. Spell sound effects sound pretty weak, as do the sword swings. This reinforces the lack of impact that combat has. The music certainly takes centre stage. I previously stated that the music in Two Worlds is generic and uninteresting, but after playing it for a longer period of time, I think I gave it less credit than it deserves. The operatic metal song that plays during the title menu, when it feels like it, is incredibly cheesy and satisfying. Overall, there are some nice melodies throughout the soundtrack, and only one or two pieces of music, particularly in underground dungeons, that stand out as inconsistent. To sum up, Two Worlds is a clunky but often endearing mess of a game. I could never defend its honour in the heat of battle, but I can confidently say that I sort of enjoyed it and thought that it was maybe possibly a bit decent. In my original review, I was very harsh on Two Worlds, and although I haven't really changed my perspectives on many of the criticisms that I previously put forward, I can at least say that I feel a lot warmer towards it than I did when I first began playing it. The combat is worse than shit, the graphics and sound are undesirable, and it feels janky in almost every possible way, but the one thing I can say about it with complete conviction is that it has character. Three years passed, and once again Topware were hungry to bestow the world with RPG brilliance. The Orcs of Antalua were ready for battle. Gandahar had risen to power, and an IGN reviewer was about to get really pissed off by a boss battle. Two Worlds 2 takes everything that Two Worlds accomplished and makes it slightly better. For the most part, some things are worse. Two Worlds 2 came out in late 2010, and in the subsequent year would again face very stiff competition. The Witcher 2, Dark Souls and a certain Bethesda game came out in 2011, but it at least had the jump on them. If the past at that point was anything to go by, it would be no surprise if the sequel to Two Worlds was overshadowed by an Elder Scrolls game. The game opens with a surprisingly competent opening cinematic that's quite well done. It's not Gordon Ramsay screaming at the sous chef level, but it's more cooked than medium rare. The game then attempted to lock me out by claiming it wasn't activated. After doing some googling and downloading a patch from a third-party website to get it to work, I managed to get it verified and working. Straight away there is some questionable decision making at play. From the first cutscene you are in a chair against your will next to your sister Kira. Presumably months have passed since the end of the first game and there's little to no information to fill the gap, other than what I can only assume is forgettable and easily missed dialogue. It's a very clunky introduction to the game. The prison acts as a tutorial area and it happens to give the player information in a much more effective manner than the first game. Once you've jumped into a portal, you're taken to an island which is an extension of the tutorial area in certain ways, as it shows you more mechanics and techniques, such as multi-arrow kills and assassinations. The story, much like the first game, revolves around freeing Kira from entrapment. The difference this time is that a team of orcs led by a prophet are pulling all the strings, rather than Gundahar. The dialogue is better in terms of writing, but still unremarkable. The worst thing is that the voice acting has improved. Rather than improving to the extent of actually being good, it's tipped into the zone of being poor rather than laughably bad. Although this is technically an improvement, it makes the game less enjoyable from an unintentional comedy standpoint. Hilariously bad voice acting is much more infrequent in TW2, but rest assured that it does occur from time to time.
You were supposed to do the job unseen. Those were my terms. You want what you asked for? You'll have to rectify your little mistake.
In general, the gameplay of Two Worlds 2 is leagues apart from its predecessor. It's still clunky and not much fun, but it's more functional and there's much more room for exploration in combat. Archery in the first game wasn't a viable option, but in Two Worlds 2 it's my go-to method of combat. The magic system has been expanded upon and is much more responsive now thanks to the better designed hotbar. While sneaking, you can assassinate enemies from behind in a stylishly clumsy fashion. The new features and design choices in combat elevate Two Worlds 2 far beyond the first game. Skills are much easier to pick up as you can learn them through skill books. These skill books can be found in dungeons or around the map and can also be bought. This, when compared to having to unlock skills solely by buying them from trainers like in the first game, is much more preferable. Although these changes are welcome and certainly do a world of good, they come with the caveat that this is still a Two Worlds game. Overall, the combat of Two Worlds 2 lacks a refinement and polish that its contemporaries had over it, and it always feels clunky in one way or another. The AI, like the first game, is a complete write-off most of the time. Enemies get stuck behind objects and are unable to find a new path. If you lure certain enemies out, they'll give up and turn back to head for their waypoint, rather than persisting in combat, often leaving themselves exposed and less of a threat. Sometimes the game just gives up on animating enemies. Like the first game, you can't conventionally block with shields and they just add to your defense stats. Why would you implement a blocking function and not allow players to use shields? It's baffling. Then there's a few more minor but still noticeable issues. There's an awful camera bobble that I can't figure out how to turn off. You can move around when engaged in dialogue, but when you get a certain distance away from the NPC, you snap back towards them. Why would you include this? It's totally useless as far as I can see. The controls are less stiff than the first game, but have a bit more of a slippery feel to them. Unfortunately, the veil of this game is constantly slipping, and like the mutated Pinocchio RPG that it is, its true janky form always exposes itself. When it comes to presentation, the song remains the same. Two Worlds 2 walks circles around the first game. Its absolute strength is that everything in each area feels interlinked and there are no stylistic clashes. The map is separated into different islands, which gives the game a larger sense of scale and allows for the artistic freedom to explore different cultural and environmental influences aesthetically. Because of this design decision, it feels like a more convincing world than the first game ever could. Upon closer inspection, towns, cities and dungeons feel a lot more detailed and fleshed out than in the previous entry of the series. Physics are applied to hair, grass and objects. The general layout of areas feels a lot more nuanced and environmental objects feel like they're close-knitted but not cluttered. It looks like a real game in this respect, especially when compared to the spaced-out, often barren look of the first game. As expected, any Two Worlds game will never get an A in any category, so brace yourself for a swift counter to all the positive qualities that Two Worlds has to offer with its presentation. Let me say this, there are no glaring issues with the look of Two Worlds 2, nothing that will be a deal breaker. There are, however, many minor gripes that contribute to the overall lack of polish that this game has. The cutscenes generally have passages with clumsy camera work. Oddly, a Matrix-esque slow-motion shot is thrown in from time to time. This is really distracting and so out of place in a game like this. A stylistically similar thing, albeit without slow motion, happens outside of cutscenes when you're in real-time combat. I think it's meant to be a kill cam, but the camera angle change happens before the killing blow pretty much every time. They've somehow managed to make the UI look worse. The general functionality is better, but the opaque glass background of the inventory menus is more of an eyesore than the parchment vibe of the first game. Every time you loot a corpse, it brings you to your inventory screen automatically. This seems like an unnecessary extra step and slows you down when you're trying to loot quickly in combat. Graphical options are pretty limited, which is a shame because the depth of field can get pretty mushy and the performance can be a little choppy from time to time, so tweaking the graphics to have a balance between performance and higher quality would have been nice. I'm sure there are many more issues like this, but none of them are bad or distracting enough to make you have a vendetta against the game developers' families. The sound design is pretty serviceable. There's not really much to say because it's done well enough to not be noticeable. Sound effects in this game are way more suited to their respective environments. Spells, sword clunks and bows sound better. Creatures have more subtlety in sound and don't sound anywhere near as irritating as in the first game. The only issue I had is that sometimes in interiors a loud swooshing sound would play rather than music. I'm assuming this is a glitch, but knowing Reality Pump, they probably put it in deliberately for a reason that will never be known outside of the Pump Club. The biggest plus of TW2 is the music. It's actually pretty good. The music that plays in the city of the first main island gives off Lawrence of Arabia vibes, which is an excessively high compliment, but that's what sprung to mind. The music is more of a character in Two Worlds 2. It felt like it was being hidden away a little bit in the first game. The biggest and only downfall of the music is no symphonic metal. Why wouldn't you include that again? If I can't listen to Nightwish while making my character's arms bigger, what's the fucking point? With all that said, it's pretty obvious from the first few hours of playing it that TW2 is better than Two Worlds in almost every way. Most of the improvements are slight but still warrant recognition. The combat has been expanded on yet feels more accessible, it looks better, it's easier to play and more functional. It's objectively a better game, but here's the thing. The combat, although more functional, is still monotonous. The AI is dreadful, so it's hard to take enemies seriously a lot of the time. You could probably cheese every enemy in this game given a little thought. The hammy voice acting and the uninteresting derivative narrative don't do anything to intrigue the player. It's by no means a masterpiece of storytelling. In all honesty, TW2 is better overall form from Reality Pump, but it's still clunky, it still lacks innovation, and it feels like a promotion from poor to mediocre. In other words, they get a medal for not being completely shit. To round things off, we have Two Worlds 2 Castle Defense, a tower defense strategy game originally for iOS and later ported to PC. I'd like to mention that not all of the maps are within a castle, so I'm not really sure why they called it Castle Defense, but we'll just assume it was a working title that stuck based on the first map, or something like that. The game opens with a cinematic ripped straight from TW2. I actually thought that I'd launched the wrong game at first. Once we've retreaded that territory, we're greeted with a menu screen. Luckily it didn't lock me out this time. I just had to put my serial key in, as you would expect. Now that we're off, let's get into some story. The storytelling of TW2 Castle Defense is very scarce. In fact, it's almost non-existent. There are text exposition dumps between levels, but other than that, nada. No dialogue, no voice acting, and no cutscenes. Now, this was originally developed as an iOS game, so there are limitations there, but given that Two Worlds has a shit ton of lore, I'm surprised that they chose to implement no cutscenes whatsoever. Unless, of course, this was just a lazy cash grab, which seems unlikely. In the campaign, you play as either Gandahar or Sordahon, commanding an army to defend you in an area. The first campaign mission sees Gandahar being overrun by orcs on his own turf. The following encounter is a retaliation, and so on and so forth. Essentially, the game covers the lead up to Gandahar taking over Castle Vakmar, which is the location where the final boss battle of TW2 takes place. The gameplay of TW2 Castle Defense is as straightforward as you might expect. Enemies come in waves and you must station archers, foot soldiers and mages in set positions. Once the enemies come within range, they are attacked by your units automatically. There are 3 skills that you can use that vary depending on the character you're playing, but for all intents and purposes they are ranged attacks and nothing more complex than that. You can use currency to buy more soldiers, upgrade existing ones, or resurrect and heal. Resurrecting is something that is going to come in handy a lot of the time. The only real issue with it is that sometimes it's hard to click on the unit you want to resurrect through a mob on the larger side. You can pause, resume and fast forward the action, and a lot of the time you're going to be fast forwarding. You only really need to slow down the gameplay when the waves get a little more challenging towards the end of a campaign map. Overall, the gameplay is really functional, but it's not engaging enough to stay interesting. For a reality pump game, this is surprisingly polished. It's just a shame that polish like that was wasted on a tower defense tie-in rather than a game in the main series. The presentation is serviceable, much like most of the Two Worlds experience would offer up. Some maps have a pretty good level of detail and have a bit of a pre-rendered quality to them. I don't doubt that the maps are 3D environments, but this quality probably arises from the fact that the maps are very static in appearance. Nothing ever changes within the maps. The setup you see in Wave 1 is the setup you'll see in Wave 20. The textures, models and post effects feel like a massive regression, but it's hard to be too critical on Castle Defense with it originally being an iOS game. I don't want to make excuses for it because in all honesty I don't believe that a game should be ported from mobile unless you're going to make it suitable for the system it's being transferred to, but as with most mobile ports, it's bare minimum effort. The worst things about the presentation are that there are no graphical options other than resolution, and occasionally you get a bug or two. I noticed that you can see the edge of the map on Chapter 3, but it wasn't by any means intrusive to the gameplay. In terms of sound design, you wouldn't believe this, but Castle Defense actually steals more from Two Worlds 2. The music is all ripped straight from TW2, which isn't the end of the world as it's a solid soundtrack. It would have been nice to hear some new music though. The sound effects are boilerplate. 90% of what you're going to hear is the sound of spells being cast, which is a little bit abrasive at first but turns into white noise after a while. Castle Defense is a very unsurprising experience. It's a by-the-book tower defense game that is easy to pick up and functional. It's by far the most polished game on the roster, and what a shame that is because it also happens to be the worst. Sometimes when you're playing Two Worlds or Two Worlds 2, you think to yourself, what on earth am I playing? Or, is this game broken? With that being said, those games have a really off-kilter charisma about them. Yes, they're janky, yes, they're rough around the edges, yes, sometimes they don't make sense, but they win you over by being inadvertently funny or out of touch. They're also just playable enough to not be annoying, most of the time, so this helps their odd personalities shine. Castle Defense washes out anything that makes Two Worlds games interesting and replaces them with a hollow, uninventive carcass. I never got much joy out of the combat in either of the main games in the series, but there was always a bad Cockney accent, a glitch, or a questionable aspect of game design that would cheer me up. Castle Defense is stripped of personality and is ultimately a horrifying gaze into what a Two Worlds game may look like if it was developed by someone other than Reality Pump. It's generic, uninteresting and forgettable. I had a very interesting experience with the Two Worlds games. They're by no means perfect, and I'd probably tell you to steer clear of them if I was having a bad day, but there is some joy to be found for those curious enough. The bottom line is, if you're expecting something as sleek as The Witcher 3, you're probably going to be disappointed, but these games stand up on their own with their unique personalities. With that said, the overall average is 4 out of 10 seems like a pretty fair score for the series as a whole. Unfortunately, Castle Defense is the biggest culprit in dragging the score down, which is a shame because its release didn't bear any impact on the series. It could have been completely avoided. Hopefully, Topware will come back in the near future with an excellent end to the series. Two Worlds 3 is a game that I'm sure many fans of the originals will be anticipating, and I hope that it delivers on what the people want. Thanks for joining me on this journey. Once again, I'm George, and I'll see you next time on All Games Reviewed.